Report story. Chapters 3 Why I'm Weary. For a long time upon her return home, Ochako saw more skeletons than neighbors. It is a heavy and awful truth, but one she had to learn to face with a straight back and impassive expression all the same. Each morning, she dragged herself from beneath the thin blanket of her childhood bedroom and made her way to Mie's emergency center, where she took orders from a man 2 decades older than her but far less experienced in the field. She waited politely for him to hand out his assignments and then Uravati just did whatever she needed to, anyway, regardless of whether she remained within the boundaries of her designated relief zone. She caught flack for that plenty, but if Ochako's time at UA, including all the conflicts and battles she'd been thrust into well before she was ready, had taught her anything, it was that often, the people making the rules or enforcing them had no fucking idea what they were talking about. Uravati went where she was needed. She did what had to be done. Nothing would ever change that, not bureaucracy, not admonishment, not even a hard-fought and barely won war. Certainly not a balding man with a superiority complex 8 kilometers wide who sat behind a desk all day while others risked their lives to repair what the PLF had torn asunder. Ochako never thought she would be here. Uravati could have gone anywhere once Shigaraki and his forces had been well and truly defeated. She could have climbed aboard a boat with Sue or run away to America like Kaminari Denki. She could have even stayed in Musutafu as Izuku Midoriya had quietly asked her to, though she pretended she couldn't hear him. Anywhere she might have gone, she would likely have been welcomed as a hero and provided with a handsome salary to match such a status. But when her parents had moved back home after their stint in the UA dormitories, they'd found their business buried in rubble, and Ochako knew precisely where she needed to be. Once she'd helped clear the debris in the worst disaster zones of Musutafu, she had not hesitated to buy a train ticket at the first opportunity. Some people think the only places impacted by the conflict were the major cities, the battles that made headlines or warranted the erection of monuments. But the scars of war run deep everywhere, even through the winding fields and forests and pastures that surround Mie. And even all this time later, there is always another fire to put out. The damage caused from the initial conflicts has long since been cleared, but the fallout continues, pervasive and persistent. Looting and riots remain a common problem, even now. Desperation makes villains of convenience out of swaths of society still without work. Ochako's hometown was never a very well-off place to begin with, and the need to put food on the table, as the young Uraraka knows all too well, can force the hands of even the most decent people to clutch around a knife or beckon their quirk for less than noble purposes. Ochako often recalls her first time on a true battlefield, pulling civilians from the rubble after the Jaku hospital raid. She remembers the feelings of loss and accomplishment swirling in a confusing torrent through her mind and her mouth and her stomach. The stench of blood and refuse, the glimmers of hope and fear in the eyes of those she pulled from the wreckage. She remembers the words of a young hero as he walked away from his duty forever with nary a glance behind him to survey the destruction of a city. And as she strained under the weight of tons of cement and steel, clearing the remnants of battles long since won or lost, she held onto those memories. Even now, they fortify her. Promoted stories. You'll also like. Hurt 'cause I love you to death Izuocha. Ha. Point 9K 141 Class 1A is now Class 2A and is working to be better heroes due to events that had happened before. Deku has gotten strong feelings toward Uraraka during the summer as After all, Omfluke 11.4K802. Will edit once I'm free. N. This is a work of fiction, and any similarity with other works is purely coincidental. Excuse grammatical errors and misspellings, Eng. Mirko X Shy Male Reader 177K 1.1 Key. Don't own MHA. I hope you enjoy the story I made. Much needed love Yandere Succubus Momo X Izu. 52.7K 834 after Wattpad. Had decided to delete this story out of nowhere, I and many reader were distraught. So I'm making a remake of the story from the ground up to compensate. Free. Onishots 150K3K. This is a collections of free X readers. Requests on this are now closed. The Heroes Return MHAXJJK ongoing 116K 1.7K in quad. Izuku. Midoriya, after being betrayed and killed, vanishes leaving hurt people behind. After 2 months in a hack, he come back, changed. How will the class re? Feelings. Izawa. X-Reader 57.4K 1.3K RE posting. This until I edit it, sorry if it's not good, it's my first time writing a story. You enroll at UA and you have multiple quirks you are really good at using, why? Yes, she could have stayed Musudafu after Shigaraki was defeated and All for One was destroyed. Yes, Izuku Midoriya had asked as much of her, as if he'd had any right to. But Ochako knows, has always known, really, since her first year at UA, that her place is here, amidst the ruins. There are no search and rescue missions anymore, there haven't been for a very long time. But she still finds them, sometimes, families huddled together in kitchens, elderly couples reaching for one another from separate beds. Sometimes their bodies are well preserved, still human. Often, that is not the case. And Ochako hates how easily she can detach herself from it. All the practiced fluidity she has developed that allows her to lift partial remains from a broken building without even flinching so they can be transported to a gravesite is unnerving. Or at least, it would be, if she ever allowed herself a moment to step back and think about it objectively. But she knows that running too fast to catch her breath is the easiest way to ignore the minuscule tragedies that play out before her every day. Uraviti's approach is clinical, detached and effective. The old, broken pieces must be removed if new life has any chance of taking root. If her parents were still alive, Ochako is sure she would talk to them about it. They would know how to hold her as she grieved the people she sends home in pieces and parts to their families. If they have any family left. But Takiko and Chataro are not here. They are not waiting for her when she returns home. No one is, and all those who remain have burdens of their own, many of them far greater than the ones she now carries. Even in the wake of the final conflict with the PLF, Ochako found hope in the beaming smiles of her parents, joyous expressions she returned readily with one of her own. Those smiles were somehow even more powerful than any quirk she'd encountered on the battlefield, and they had kindled warmth in her chest as she'd spent time in a hospital bed recovering from her wounds, even when she could only see them on the too small screen of her phone. She'd been hopeful when she'd returned to Mie to live with them again, looking forward to a future she could build alongside the two people who loved her most, whom she loved most. After all, even with their business destroyed, the Urarakas still had some advantages in the Reconstruction era. Because there was no shortage of construction projects. Once Ochako had helped them secure some loans to rent the appropriate equipment, their family business had flourished as never before. Most of the larger construction companies had been called away to bigger cities and more important rebuilding projects, so the Urarakas had plenty of jobs to keep them busy at home. And though her father still undercharged his clients, Uravati made plenty of money in her own work to supplement his generosity. Certainly, there had been an abundance of rescue and relief assignments to occupy her, a fact she had been grateful for at the time as she attempted to push away memories she did not wish to face. Burying Kyoka had been the hardest. Her parents had wailed almost as loud as present Mike as the priest had given their daughter a new name in the afterlife, and Ochako had made such tight fists that there had been little red half moons cut into her palms when she'd eventually loosened them. Work, she found, was the best way not to think about all the awful things she wished she could forget. While many of her friends, Mina and Momo included, had poured themselves into relationships to cope, Ochako found that she and Suyu were more similar in that regard. They both achieved solace through labor. And so Uravati quickly became the most recognizable hero in Mie. Not only did she participate in the cleanup and rebuilding, but she was often the only hero close enough to respond to small calls for things like armed robbery or assault. In those first 2 years after the conflict officially ended, Ochako spent most of her days as Uravati for as much as 18 hours at a time, collapsing heavy and exhausted into her childhood bed as soon as she'd washed the grime off only to bat her eyes open in the pre-dawn dim to do it again a few hours later. But the brief moments she was not working, when she could simply breathe in the fresh air of the countryside she'd missed so much, and perhaps even eke out enough time to share a meal with her parents, made it even more worthwhile than the faces of grateful civilians when she helped them build new businesses or sift through the debris of their destroyed homes to find irreplaceable memories. She'd seen as many people cry at funerals as she had clutching photo albums and wedding dresses. Ochako was lucky, she knew, to have lost so little. And she had thought she could go on living her life exactly like that forever. And then a gentle earthquake, barely enough for her to even register as she'd walked out of a dango shop on her break, had shaken the earth. And the new school building had collapsed in the middle of construction. Uravati helped with the rescue efforts, of course, but she had carefully maintained a wide berth when it came time to recover the bodies on the west side of the building where the worst of the debris lay. Because she knew what would be found there. She barely looked at the bodies before they were cremated, it was too difficult. And suddenly, Ochako had an even greater respect for Suyu Asui and all she'd endured to drag her family members out of the destruction of their home with love and care. Takiko and Chataro left their daughter everything they had, a small house, an all but barren bank account, and a construction business still in the red, though less so than when she'd been a teenager. Without them, the house felt cold and empty, and Ochako would have gladly given up every cent from that account if it would have brought them back for even a single afternoon. Dutifully, Ochako arranged their funerals, despite being so incredibly tired of the ritual. It was strange to receive the okoden instead of offer it. The familiar words of condolence nearly rolled off her tongue on more than one occasion before she remembered she was the one being consoled. Many of her classmates did not come and she took no offense. They had all seen so much of death for so long that she could not begrudge them the opportunity to shield themselves from yet another tear-stained affair. Iida had come, of course. And Momo and Todoroki. Mina Ishido and Toru Hagakure had even cut short their trip to Hawaii to attend, their new matching silver rings catching the sun as it peered through the dull gray clouds. Their attendance had touched Ochako much more deeply than she'd ever imagined, The way their hands never disengaged from one another's was an important reminder that happy dreams still existed. And when she noticed a messy shock of dark green hair at the back of the crowd, Ochako's throat tightened, and she felt the first sting of tears she'd successfully held back. She hadn't invited him, hadn't spoken to him in more than 2 years, and still he'd come. She wondered if he knew how much it meant to her, or if he only showed up because it was expected of Deku to be seen supporting a fellow hero during her time of need. And that, in the end, is why Ochako's stomach turned sour. It is why she said nothing more to him than, "Thank you for coming," when he offered his scripted condolences. Ochako used to believe she knew who Izuku Midoriya was right down to the marrow of his bones. He had been her kind, hard-working classmate. A nervous mutterer who blushed twice as hard as she did. He'd been a friend, and then something more. Someone she hoped maybe would take her hand in his one day the way Mina held Toru's. She had looked at him and seen a hero. It turned out, however, Ochako did not know him at all. She was not sure anyone ever had. Because she hadn't seen he'd become a soldier. Even a bureaucratic tool when the occasion called for it. In that first year at UA, before he'd struck out on his own, Ochako could never have guessed she would one day find him back to back on a battlefield with the zealous man who'd nearly killed his friends in Hosu. In all her dreams of Deku, she'd never seen him spattered with blood and swiping his single remaining hand over his face to wipe the viscera from his mouth guard so he could breathe more easily. The single-minded focus he had for heroics when she'd met him had translated too well to other endeavors. And when he disappeared back into the attending crowd, Ochako hated that, despite everything, she still wished he was standing beside her instead of separated by dozens of other mourners. She still felt that strange flutter in her chest when their eyes met, traitorous and light. She remembers her confusion when she'd woken in that hospital room to find the green-eyed boy who'd been her first love sitting beside her bed. Her throat was raw and dry, a side effect, she figured, from intubation during surgery. His own shoulder was crudely bandaged, ragged cuts and scrapes littering the exposed skin of his other arm, the right side of his face grotesquely swollen from what looked like a hit by a battering ram. And he was crying. Those same big, fat tears he'd always cried. The sound of it permeated her entire body, made her feel like she was vibrating. And she was sure if she hadn't been so doped up on pain medication she would have felt the sound like a bullet piercing straight through her. Izuku had taken her hand in his remaining one, still crooked and scarred just like she remembered it, and he'd asked her to stay with him. Just like that. Right out of nowhere, he'd begged her to forgive him and stand beside him as the world learned how to heal itself. Ochako Uraraka had remembered the kindness in his luminous green eyes and wanted to say yes. But something wouldn't let her. Pride, maybe. Or fear. It might even have been the painkillers. She'd never really thought too deeply on it. What had he expected? 3 years later, 3 years since she'd seen him up close without blood on both their hands, and he'd half confessed and asked her to stay in a place that barely existed. So she gave in to that hesitation and let it pull her away from him again. She pretended to fall back asleep without a word. He left. And Ochako spent the whole summer walking under his window hoping he was okay, that the beautiful boy she'd once called her best friend was slowly finding his footing again. It's even worse than Izuku imagined. The lights are brighter, somehow even hotter than in the studio. The microphones are more insistent, pressing ever closer. The powder on his face isn't enough to hide the gleam of his sweat, and he's sure the fact that he didn't sleep last night is painfully obvious to everyone watching this press conference in high definition on their television sets or computer screens or phones on their commute. He can feel a bead of sweat as it slips between his brows and lingers on the tip of his nose. He wants to swipe it off, but he's too afraid to move. If he does, he's sure all the invasive questions will turn to him directly rather than the poor woman the commission has appointed as its mouthpiece. Moriko Fujita is older than Izuku, and quirkless, which makes her an interesting addition to the Hero Commission. A representative of the downtrodden, Izuku empathizes with a lot more than most of the other members. He wonders whether she volunteered to deal with this particular media frenzy because her status might soothe the worries of civilians on edge after seeing Deku intimately enjoying the company of a convicted member of the PLF. Or maybe the commission forced her. Izuku doesn't imagine Moriko thinks much of him, all things considered. He knows she's had a hard life, has seen the scars on her knuckles from fights and the way she twitches when someone walks up behind her without warning. Izuku is lucky All Might gave him a quirk when he did, and he often wonders if those who remain without envy his new status. He wonders if the roles were reversed, whether his own jealousy might even bloom into hatred. But how did he not know it was Himiko Toga? It's a young man asking, hand thrown in the air as if anyone is adhering to the rules of waiting their turn rather than simply shouting out every question or concern burning in their minds. Because I was too lonely to question it, it is a well-documented fact that Himiko Toga possesses a transformation quirk that allows her to take on the appearance of anyone whose blood she consumes. She leaves it at that, and Izuku is grateful for the open-ended nature of her answer. Why was she wearing his t-shirt? Someone shouts from the back. Because it was raining. Her clothes were soaked and she was cold, no comment. What about danger sense? It never activated. A fact that still pricks at Izuku's overly curious brain upon occasion. There is no report of danger sense having been used during the encounter. Why won't Deku answer our questions himself? Because the Hero Commission is afraid I'll slip up and say something I'm not supposed to. He wonders if the reporters can see in his eyes how much he does not want to be here. How much he is hoping someone will jump up to the podium and take him away from all of this. Deku is here in an official capacity, just as I am. His job is to keep us safe and protected from villains, mine is to respond to your inquiries. How can he keep us safe if he sympathizes with them? Izuku doesn't mean to straighten his posture, but he does. He wonders when sympathy became something to be avoided or derided. He wonders if maybe the whole world had always been more like Katsuki Bakugo than Izuku Midoriya, and he just failed to notice because he was too busy looking for the good in everyone. Even when he met Shigaraki in battle. Even when he awoke in the embrace of Himiko Toga. Because both of their gazes reflected the same loneliness Izuku had come to recognize in his own when he stared into his bathroom mirror each morning. Even if not everyone is capable of redemption, surely they are deserving of compassion. At least, that's what Izuku has always believed. Izuku doesn't hear Moriko's answer as he grinds his teeth together, but he knows she'll provide the standard response pre-approved by the commission. In fact, he doesn't hear a single other question or answer as he diligently steels himself against the sound of each voice in the room. He shouldn't have to be here. There should be no need for him to explain himself or his actions. The arrest records exist. There's a report these journalists could look through and, assuming they had any critical thinking skills, piece together the general sense of what transpired. That doesn't look as snazzy as a headline, though. It doesn't grab as many viewers as a live stream where you can tune in to watch Deku the hero picked apart in real time. His ears detect another attempt to parse out the identity of the person Himiko came disguised as, and Izuku bites his tongue hard enough that he can taste iron. And then, he is saved. Not by the kindness of the other people in the room. Not by empathy or respect for his privacy. But by danger sense. He leans forward and whispers into Moriko's ear to let her know there is an emergency. He bows from the waist toward the crowd of reporters as they continue to shout questions over the general murmur as camera flashes blind his emerald eyes intermittently. The bead of sweat drips off his nose and onto his shoes as he stares at the floor. Please excuse me, I'm afraid I am needed elsewhere. And he leaves. Izuku knows the commission will be unhappy, but there's little they can do since it's his hero work that's drawn him away. What he cannot fathom, however, is how vicious tomorrow's headlines will be. He remembers the sting the last time someone called him a coward. Remembers the dull ache in his chest when Katsuki Bakugo told him to take a swan dive off a school building. And it is only as he is thumbing his way through a particularly vitriolic comments section the following morning that Izuku realizes even a hero hand chosen by All Might is not safe from the scorn of his fellow humans. Sometimes it feels as though nothing he does, not even saving the world, will ever be enough to make up for the sin he committed of being born without a quirk to call his own. His phone rings, Moriko's name flashing across the screen, and he realizes he's too tired to try and fight it anymore. When Ochako wakes, it takes her a moment to realize where she is. Her brain flies through all the details of the space as if cataloging her tomb will somehow save her. But instead of the cool gray concrete she expects, she finds cream-colored ceiling tiles and faded peach walls. Instead of rebar there is only a thin comforter haphazardly thrown across her body. The breeze she feels against the skin of her arms is not tainted by the smell of blood and ash. Rather, it is sweet and refreshing. Her breathing is sharp, too fast. Her pupils dilated, taking in too much of the early morning light. There is a window to her left, cracked open enough that it might have been opened from outside. A shadow in the corner could be a person crouched, waiting to pounce upon her in her delirium. Something is twisted around her ankle, fastening her to the too small bed. As her eyes adjust, she realizes the window is open because she likes the breeze. The crouched figure in the corner is a pile of dirty laundry she's been meaning to attend to for weeks. The cuff at her ankle is her discarded sheet, twisted fiercely around her legs from the thrashing she's done in her sleep. She's sweating, but that's to be expected. The bed is small, but that makes sense too once she realizes she's in her childhood bedroom, precisely where she is supposed to be. Her breathing slows, sweat cooling on her skin as the breeze from the window cascades through the room. She is safe, Ochako realizes all too slowly. Safe in her parents' house in Mie where she has been for several years. Now her mornings are like this more often than not, and she wonders if she will ever adapt to her circumstances. The lack of normalcy frustrates her and Ochako runs her fingers through her knotted bedhead like a punishment, tugging fiercely on the knots as though the sharp pain in her scalp could admonish her. How long before Mie feels like home again? Better yet, how long before Ochako feels like herself? She pads her way to the kitchen to brew tea in silence. The morning is still fresh, too young to head to work, no matter how much she desires the company. Instead, Ochako busies herself with catching up on the news, thumb scrolling through the feed on her phone mindlessly as she waits for the water to boil. Most of the headlines are recycled: rebuilding efforts in Osaka, a small villain uprising in Tokyo. Ochako huffs when she sees Bakugo's sneering face next to a gossipy headline touting his latest dating exploits. On one hand, Ochako is extremely happy there is nothing new for her to read about. If the world is in a holding pattern, same as she is, then there are no new threats to worry over. No impending doom to assess and oppose. And maybe she isn't falling as far behind as she fears. The kettle whistles and Ochako steeps her green tea until it is a little too bitter before she removes the bag and tosses it in the sink. She knows she will need to eat before she truly begins her day, but for now she is content to sit on the stairs at the front of the house with her teacup clutched in her hands as she watches the sun complete its ascent. In shorts and a tank top, she shivers when the cool morning air kisses her skin. But the beverage helps soothe her discomfort as it warms her from within. She wonders how often any of the villains she's fought have considered the collateral damage of their ideals. Surely, the deaths and injuries of civilians do not linger in their mind's eye the way they do hers. But as Shigaraki's henchmen rot in their cells in Avernus, did they ever consider that homes are still being rebuilt? That precious ancient shrines will never again bless some of the rural hillsides of her youth. The toll of war, she knows now, is so much more than she ever could have imagined as a child. Even when she'd studied photographs of Hiroshima and Nagasaki in her middle school history textbooks, the utter devastation had never been real. Now, as she presses her fingerpads to countless I-beams and planks of wood, the apartment complex she is helping to build comes alive. A lurching combination of metal and glass that will house hundreds of displaced families still trapped in the bare and uncomfortable emergency housing units provided by the government. The nascent skyscraper might have been a thing of beauty if she did not know everything that had been sacrificed in order to get even this far. She knows they are standing on the ashes of hundreds of lost souls as she reaches the limits of her quirk, retching into a convenient bush before she pushes through and continues. Ignoring her limits is something Ochako has become intimately familiar with throughout the years since she began on the path to becoming a hero. There is no time to calculate the weight of things when you are scrambling to save lives. No room for mathematics in the space between heartbeats, which is all it took for Shigaraki to level a city and pilfer the futures of thousands of innocents. After a long day of overseeing reconstruction, Ochako allows herself the indulgence of a long, hot bath. Certainly, a quick shower would keep the water and heating bills lower, but she has learned many things in the past few years, and one is that money is not the only value measurement that matters. A lesson it took her far too long to learn. Ochako does not turn on the lights as she bathes, preferring to linger in the steam in the dim bathroom, only a few shards of evening light streaming in through the small window above her. As she leans against the wall of the tub, arms draped over each side, she sighs. The hot water soothes her tired muscles, easing the strain she feels in her prematurely aged joints. She makes the mistake of closing her eyes, allowing her thoughts to drift lazily through the haze she's created. Relaxation is a weapon Ochako knows too well. When her mind relaxes, it also drifts, usually to places she is not interested in exploring. Before she is aware of what is happening, her mind casts back to unpleasant memories she wishes she could forget. Ochako often wonders if there is a quirk somewhere that would suck all the horrible recollections from her mind so she could face her future with a clean slate. For now, however, until she finds such a person, she is forced to relive the battles she nearly lost in vivid detail even as she attempts to do anything but. In therapy, she has learned grounding techniques, but in the dark of the bathroom, held in the basin of the tub, she is trapped with only her thoughts. She remembers the look on Suyu's face when they found her family home in a place Yue had promised would remain protected. She remembers the last moments of Kyoka's life as she used her earphone jacks to pull Momo and Toru to safety as the long spear of a villain's transformation quirk pierced through her ribcage. She recalls in vivid detail the way Kirishima held that building overhead until his quirk gave out and body collapsed, crushing the selfless and optimistic boy beneath it. Her hand moves absent-mindedly to her chipped tooth as she remembers the seizures that racked her body after prolonged use of her zero-gravity quirk in the final conflict and ensuing, and often simultaneous, rescue efforts. She had never thought she could lift so much until the moment asked her to. Those seconds before she blacked out were the first ones in which Ochako knew she was truly a hero. Like All Might or Izawa or Kirishima, Uravati had ignored her body's own self-preservation instincts to save lives. She tasted the blood in the back of her throat as her nose bled with the effort. She felt the pressure increase on her lungs and her stomach, heard the ringing in her ears as she pressed her fingers to more and more and more pieces of debris. More humans. More bodies. As the water cools in the bathtub, Ochako remembers waking up in Ida's arms, his tears warm and foreign on her cheeks as he wept over what he thought was a corpse. Many of her friends lost more in the war than she did. When she clutches at her chest, running her fingers carefully over the long scar there as she catches her breath, she remembers the funerals of friends and comrades. Ochako Uraraka is alive even if she is no longer exactly sure how to be. She knows it is important to move forward, which is why she has dedicated herself to the act of rebuilding, no matter how tedious or strenuous or unfulfilling. She eats plain white rice with fermented soybeans for dinner. Ochako knows her mother would tisk if she could see her daughter eating such a plain and charmless meal, but it is cheap and easy and nutritious, which is all she can really ask for. And anyway, her parents are long buried, and so there is no one to scoff at her decisions and force her to laugh at her own ridiculousness. After dinner, Ochako once again checks the news. She is greeted by Todoroki's passive face as she scrolls through the day's headlines. Though Ochako knows she shouldn't, she is pleased to see he and Bakugo have made progress. When Ochako thinks of Rikiya Yatsubashi's state-sponsored execution, she feels nothing more than relief. Absently, she makes a note to say as much to her therapist the next time she sees them. The angry churn in her stomach is a reminder that her thoughts are not always her own. Just as she is about to put her phone away for the evening, Ochako's thumb stills and her eyes narrow. The Hero News Network headline is from yesterday, one that somehow Ochako missed in her daily attempt to keep up with the happenings of the world. It looks exactly the same as all the others, but the 11 words carry more weight than even Ochako could manage with her quirk. Deku a traitor. Hero evasive on relationship with villain Himiko Toga. Ochako doesn't realize she's biting her lip until the thin skin peels away and she tastes the blood in her mouth. Sputtering, she fumbles for a napkin and presses it to the split flesh as her eyes continue reading. Izuku Midoriya, hero named Deku, appeared with a Hero Commission spokesperson to address recently unearthed photos of the hero with convicted PLF member and current Avernus inmate, Himiko Toga. However, Deku left the press conference early without answering any questions. Both he and the Hero Commission were evasive when asked about the circumstances surrounding the leaked pictures. Ochako clutches her fist around the phone, refusing to continue reading. She laughs, a sad, hollow sound, in her empty kitchen, and it bounces off the counters and the walls, flying back at her from every surface with malicious intent. Her thoughts swirl confusingly as she is assaulted by memories of Himiko pressing a blade into her skin and Momo's gentle voice over the phone as she revealed the circumstances of the woman's eventual arrest. Himiko had spent months evading capture, and Ochako had spent every day peering over her shoulder waiting to see herself staring back from the crowd. The villain's arrest had been a relief, even if the way it had happened set her teeth on edge. She clutches at the scar on her chest, fiddling with the ruined skin through the material of her t-shirt. And it occurs to her now that Izuku Midoriya, for all his gifts, has no more power than she does. The realization makes her inconsolably sad, though the pain of it is nothing compared with the way Toga's serrated blade cut into the bone of her sternum as she attempted to butterfly Uravity, to break her open until the two of them could become one. Ochako picks up her phone and scrolls through the contacts until she finds the one she needs. Her finger hovers over the call button for a long moment before she presses it. And as she waits for the voice on the other end to answer, she mentally prepares a list of all the things she will need to do before she leaves in the morning. She knows this is a long shot, a last-ditch desperate effort to clear Izuku's name since he refuses to do so himself. His silence is a white flag, but Ochako refuses to let him surrender. She doesn't owe him anything, she knows, but the thought of letting him flail alone in an angry sea, even after all that has happened, does not feel very heroic. When the person on the other end of the line picks up, she can hear how tired he is. Uravity. What a surprise. Hi, Commissioner Tsukauchi. I hope I'm not disturbing you. Not at all, Uraraka. What can I do for you? I'm afraid I need to ask a favor. If Izuku won't ask for help, yet again, she will force it upon him instead. Chapter 4 Writing on the Walls. It's too early for someone to be knocking on Izuku's door, and yet that's the first thing he hears upon waking, the distinct pounding of an irate fist against wood. Based on the insistent rhythm, Izuku is fairly certain he knows who it is, but he desperately hopes he's wrong as he pulls open the door. Took you long enough, shithead. Katsuki Bakugo has not changed a bit. Izuku grumbles, nice to see you too, though he knows the other man can't hear his groggy response. Still, he figures the loud blonde has gotten pretty good at reading lips, so he probably understands well enough as he's shoving his way past Izuku with a disgruntled TCH. Behind him, Manga Fukidashi gives a polite wave as he steps inside and Shoto Todoroki pauses a moment in front of Izuku. Good morning, he says, as if it's a totally natural thing to wake up someone up at 4:30 a.m. by nearly breaking his door down. It's nice to see you. Izuku thinks Shoto is trying to give him a reassuring smile, though the effect is less than comforting. He turns to follow his guests back into his apartment after scanning the hallway and shooting an apologetic wave to the woman in the apartment down the hall as she glares at him. By the time he returns to his living room, the three men have already made themselves comfortable. Manga peruses Izuku's pro-hero memorabilia collection while Katsuki helps himself to some instant coffee in the kitchen. Shoto, meanwhile, sits in Izuku's favorite chair flipping through last month's Heroes Monthly magazine. What the hell, Deku? It's been a while since he's heard the childhood nickname used to refer to himself rather than to the hero he's known for being. The syllables sound all wrong, like Katsuki is spitting broken pieces of glass at a chalkboard. Izuku is silent for a long moment and he watches Katsuki shoot a questioning glance to Manga, who reassures him by displaying an ellipses. Izuku still does not understand the strange shorthand the two men have developed, though he's glad Katsuki is at least smart enough to rely on someone else to help facilitate communication, given he's still too stubborn to learn proper JSL. Everyone knows the hearing aids he uses now are more for show than anything. Katsuki's auditory sense is well beyond repair by now. Shoto still has the magazine held aloft in his hands, though it's clearly just a prop because his eyes are fixed precisely on Izuku. I think what Katsuki means is how are you doing? Izuku scoffs because he knows that isn't at all what Katsuki meant, though he's proud of Shoto for trying to salvage the interaction. I'm fine, aside from being rudely awoken before the sun. Izuku glares at Katsuki, who watches him disinterestedly over the rim of his mug. He hears a series of clicks and realizes they're being created by Manga's quirk as little tokes and zips that are easy on the ears. Katsuki reads the characters as they appear across Manga's forehead and then he looks at Izuku. You should have been up already. Doesn't your shift start soon? I'm off today. All week, actually. He notices the way everyone in the room tenses. They must expect the reason. Hero commissions orders, he clarifies, anyway. And he can't help that the words roll off his tongue like a piece of sour licorice. When he received the call as he peeled his sweaty costume off the night after the disastrous press conference, Izuku nearly hurled his phone hard enough to put a hole in his wall. As if temporary leave of absence sounds any better than the timeout it actually is. Maybe it's good for you to take some time off, Shoto says as he tosses the magazine back onto the table he retrieved it from. This feels like an intervention. Like the three men in his apartment are afraid Izuku is going to hurt himself. He doesn't like it, doesn't want it. Since when have Katsuki or Shoto been his friends, anyway? Truly. Not since UA, probably. And as much research as Izuku has put into Manga's unique quirk, he barely knows the man beyond his work advocating for people with quirks that make them appear inhuman. A noble cause, one Izuku has voiced support for himself, but not enough for any sense of brotherhood to exist between the two of them. What do you want? He asks, every muscle in his body going slack with exhaustion, both from lack of sleep and emotional overexertion. We want you to stop acting like a fucking pussy and get your shit together. I think what he means to say. I know exactly what I meant to say. Shoto is cut off by the amplified sound of thunder. It's as if a storm has broken out in Izuku's apartment. Only Katsuki doesn't jump. Instead, his eyes only narrow further as he glares at Manga's interruption. It takes Izuku a moment to realize he can feel the vibration. The tenuous silence following the outburst is broken by a simple, enough. Izuku is surprised to hear Manga's normal voice, laden though it may be with authority and exhaustion. He honestly expected the comic hero to be there mostly as a translator for Katsuki, rather than an active participant himself. It seems Izuku was mistaken. As Manga continues, he expertly switches between the same soft scratches and knocks he used before in his normal speech. It's enthralling to watch, the way he maneuvers so fluidly between the two ways of speaking. His mastery of his quirk is exquisite. For the first time in a very long while, Izuku's right hand twitches with the urge to scribble furiously in a notebook. We didn't come here to argue with Midoriya. We came to offer support. Once he finishes reading the onomatopoeia as it races across Manga's head, Katsuki shares a glance with Shoto, whose mismatched eyes dart quickly over to Izuku and then back again. If you'd rather we leave, Midoriya. I understand, Shoto says, and Izuku can feel the way Katsuki rolls his eyes even if he doesn't see it. Izuku doesn't know what to say. He hasn't seen these men in months, and before that, it's not as if they were socializing on a regular basis. Memories of both men from his time at UA are an excruciating reminder of everything he lost in the pursuit of All for One's defeat. Had he not left, he wonders if he and Shoto would be much closer, whether he would have been invited to the Todoroki Yaoyorozu wedding. He wonders if he would still call Katsuki Kachan, if the two men would have rebuilt the bonds from their childhood. Instead, they are all but strangers standing in his home. It feels like a poorly planned reunion show for some reality TV program. I think that would probably be best, he says, though his fists clench in protest. Bullshit. Katsuki was never good at modulating his voice, even before he lost his hearing. Now, it's much worse, and even Shoto flinches at the way the explosive man's voice reverberates off the walls. Izuku is sure his neighbors will be filing a petition to have him evicted in the afternoon for disturbing the peace before sunrise. You're a damn wreck, even I can see that. That press conference was a fucking disaster. Hell, even Icy Hot knew, he's the one who called me. Katsuki has abandoned his coffee to cool on the counter as he moves toward Izuku in the living room. When he says Shoto is the one who called, Izuku looks at the stoic man, who provides a curt nod of affirmation. We are worried about you, Midoriya. And Izuku's heart aches because that is the nicest thing anyone has said to him in days. Even in Tokyo, when he'd rushed to aid civilians in an evacuation as a small group of villains attempted to seize the new Tocho building, the best he got was a curt, thanks. Mostly, he received sneers and hands shoving him away even after he carried them to safety. He should call his mother, he realizes. I'm fine, Todoroki. Really. He isn't, probably, but what the hell can they do about it? They have their own lives, their own jobs. Izuku walked away from UA almost a decade ago because he was tired of being a burden to others. He isn't about to start doing it again. Now he hears Katsuki's approach, feels the vibration of the floor under the man's heavy footsteps. Manga tries to intervene, but Shoto is closer, shooting up out of his chair to intercept his friend. But he's too late. Katsuki makes it to Izuku before anyone can stop him, and one for all bursts to life across Izuku's skin as he prepares to defend himself against an AP shot. But that isn't what happens. Instead, Katsuki's large, strong arms wrap awkwardly around Izuku's neck, pulling the other man forcefully against his shoulder as he lets out a muffled yelp of surprise. The room suddenly seems much dimmer than before as the red and green light of Izuku's quirk fades away. What are you doing? He asks. If A were here, he'd fucking hug you, is all Katsuki says. And it takes Izuku a moment to parse it out. Aejiro. Kirishima. No, 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 his mind screams, his name was Red Riot. But it is too late. Memories of the red-headed boy with sharp teeth set in a permanent smile flood him, threaten to pull him under the tide. His hands come up to fist Katsuki's sweater hard enough to stretch the material permanently. All Katsuki does is squeeze him a little harder. Maybe too hard, if Izuku really thinks about it, but this is Katsuki Bakugo, after all. The boy he used to call Kachan with such fondness he could ignore the burns and bruises the bigger boy gave him, so he supposes anything less than a chokehold is considered affection. And it is then that Izuku finally cries. Ochako never saw Tartarus in person. She's seen photos, of course, but never visited the place before it was destroyed. Still, she can't imagine any place on Earth ever feeling as dark and desolate as Avernus. It's a more than 6-hour drive from Mie to Mount Fuji. And as she descends into the depths of the volcano in a reinforced glass elevator, Ochako feels her skin crawl. The individual cells are cut into the interior walls like a sprawling, sinister honeycomb. Metal walkways of reinforced steel circle around each level, allowing minimal space for guards to maintain a view of every inmate. Centralized viewing stations and guard houses appear intermittently in the center. There is not an inch of space within Avernus that is not watched at every moment. The further she descends, the closer Ochako comes to the worst criminals housed here. The lowest levels are reserved for those who pioneered the PLF's rhetoric, serial killers, and the utterly unhinged. And she swallows, feeling as if the sun is too far away to keep her safe. Fuji hasn't erupted in nearly 500 years, though it is still considered active, and the sensation that she is trespassing on some sacred piece of the earth is pervasive as Ochako continues her descent. She knows the volcano is under strict observation, that quirks have been used to reinforce its structure and allow for precise control of the magma flows buried even deeper within the cone than she is now. Ochako attended the original briefing when the Hero Commission demonstrated the failsafe whereby the structure could be flooded with lava in sections or its entirety in the event of a breach like the one that destroyed Tartarus. She knows her old teacher Smintos helped with construction of the chambers that made such a feat possible. She shivers as she steps out of the elevator, despite the oppressive humidity and the thick coat she still wears to defend against the cool winter air above. This is only the second time Ochako has visited Avernus, the first for a prisoner transport, not because she was particularly qualified for it, but because she was the only hero available to do it. Much like her last sojourn here, she hopes it is the last. As she is escorted to the chamber she seeks, she can feel the eyes of the inmates on her. The calculated way they assess her abilities with a single glance makes her feel as if 1,000 beetles are crawling across the flesh of her scalp, burrowing in her hair so she can't pull them away. She thinks perhaps she should have worn her uniform if for no other reason than it would make her feel more confident and prepared. When they reach cell 049, Ochako notices, and her muscles tense instinctively, there is already a chair waiting for her, though Ochako does not use it. She stares at the uncomfortable-looking thing as the man who escorted her scans his hand into the reader beside the door to activate the microphone and speakers so she can talk with the person on the other side of the reinforced glass. As he pulls his palm away, the dim lights flicker brighter within the chamber. "You'll have 20 minutes," he says, and then he continues moving along the metal walkway, leaving Ochako alone with the person she has come all this way to visit. "What a surprise," the girlish voice says over the crackling of the speaker. "It's been too long, Ochako." The way Himiko Toga stretches out the syllables of her first name makes Ochako's throat tighten. And when she flicks her eyes up from the chair, she finds Himiko pressing her nose against the glass at eye level, her mouth pulled taut in a smile that shows off her two sharp canine teeth. It takes every ounce of self-control Ochako has not to flinch away. She knows the glass is nearly 10 centimeters thick, that there is no way for Himiko to break through the pane to reach her. But her scar itches all the same beneath the fabric of her shirt, especially when Himiko runs her tongue along her teeth as she awaits Ochako's answer. Hello, Toga. Though it seems impossible, the blonde woman's smile grows even wider. Ochako, call me Himiko. I think we're close enough, don't you? The brunette frowns. She knows the woman on the other side of the glass is only trying to get a rise out of her. That Himiko Toga has spent countless hours learning everything she can about Ochako Uraraka, which makes her uniquely qualified to push all of the hero's buttons. I'm not here to chit-chat, Toga. Himiko taps her fingers along the glass as if she's trying to draw the attention of the most interesting animal at the zoo, and Ochako wonders how it is she feels as if she's the one on display and not the person who's held here against their will. Then why'd you come, Ochako? Did you miss me? She tilts her head and bends over at the waist so she is looking at Ochako very nearly upside down. I sure have missed you. It is then that Ochako truly takes in Himiko's appearance. She's skinnier and paler than she used to be, a little Wayne stick figure in her oversized jumpsuit. Her hair, rather than being pulled back in the two buns Ochako is familiar with, has been cut short to her chin and hangs freely. No elastics or ties allowed, Ochako realizes. And she can see the thin blue veins that run along Himiko's hands and bare feet, can even see them along her jawline. Her skin has been rendered translucent down here in the dark of her cavernous sentence. I need. Ochako hesitates, trying to decide how to word her request in the best way to ensure Himiko's acquiescence. I need to ask you a favor, Toga. The young woman's eyes light up and she stands straight once more, pressing the side of her face against the glass as she attempts to get a better look at Ochako through the distortion created by its thickness. She giggles, and Ochako remembers the feeling of being pinned down beneath her, struggling to breathe as Uravati attempted to disarm her. She shivers even as she sweats. I don't know, Ake company, as you can see, she gestures around her cell. I don't really have a lot to offer you here. For the first time, Ochako truly takes in the space Himiko has been given. A small futon, a toilet and sink with a single shelf. A chair and desk are bolted to the floor along the opposite wall. And on the wall in front of it is a calendar, which seems particularly cruel. The most interesting thing, though, is what is next to the calendar. Himiko has drawn something directly on the wall in what looks like chalk. It takes Ochako a moment of confused study to realize she is looking at the faces of her dead enemies. Twice and Shigaraki and Spinner stare back at her from the crude cave drawings. Below them, Stain and Izuku stare back at her, too. And next to them, the start of another portrait. She is terribly afraid she knows exactly who it's meant to be. Ochako unfurls her arms and pulls of her jacket. Her armpits are sticky in the heat, and she wonders if the cells are climate controlled because Himiko looks about as cool as an ice cream mochi. What if I had something to offer you? Something good? Ochako asks. And she hopes the spark of interest in Himiko's eyes is enough to assure her success in this ridiculous gambit. The woman says nothing for a long time, and Ochako hopes her allotted 20 minutes doesn't run out before she can even ask what she's come here for. Himiko makes quite the show of bringing her pointer finger to her chin as if she is in truly deep thought about her response. When her gaze finally rests on Ochako's fully, the latter hopes she will finally get the answer she needs so she can leave. But the teasing lilt in Himiko's voice is gone when she says, "Show me." Ochako frowns. "Show you what?" When Himiko's finger traces delicately over her own breastbone, Ochako's blood runs like ice water in the heated funnel. The pro-hero folds her arms over her chest, mouth set in a hard line that says precisely what she means without her having to open her mouth. Himiko's voice is all steel and seriousness still when she says, "If you don't show me, Ochako, I won't even listen to your request." Ochako considers leaving. She thinks of how easy it would be to tap her thigh and ascend back into the light. Out of the shadows of Avernus. Well beyond Himiko Toga's reach. She doesn't really know why she's here. Why she's so dead set on helping a man she barely knows anymore. Is it because she had a crush on him once? Because he managed to save the world? Because the bright light she used to see in his eyes is gone in every interview and photograph she sees of him lately? Or is it because she knows Himiko was disguised as herself when she visited Izuku's apartment? Ochako knows, logically, this isn't her fault, that Himiko could have disguised herself as plenty of people to gain access to the strange object of her obsessive affection. But the point stands that she used Ochako's skin to do it, that because Ochako was not strong enough to fight Himiko off before she pierced her skin and drew her blood, Izuku was left vulnerable to attack. Himiko runs her tongue along her teeth again and Ochako reaches up to the neck of her t-shirt, yanking it down as low as she can while still maintaining some sense of modesty. The inmate in cell 049 leans against the glass with as if she's trying to choose a particularly delicious-looking pastry from a display case. Ochako sees the drool at the corner of the villain's mouth as she inspects her handiwork. The scar is jagged and dark against Ochako's skin. It runs between her breasts halfway to her navel. It was never very deep, thankfully, because Himiko hit her sternum and never broke through it, though the chipping of the bone was obvious on her X-rays when she was finally coherent enough to look at them. The majority of the blood came from the needle Himiko had jabbed into Ochako's thigh, but the puncture barely left a mark afterward, and it's faded nicely, now. The scar on her chest is a reminder of the ordeal, the last fight Ochako ever allowed herself to lose. Ochako often wonders what atrocities Himiko might have committed wearing her skin, and it makes her mouth water as it prepares for her stomach to eject bile. "So pretty, Ochako." Ochako yanks her shirt back up. The neck is all wonky and stretched out now. She'll throw the shirt away later. She'd rather spend money on a new one than ever wear it again. "My turn," Ochako says. "I need you to give a statement about what happened between you and Izuku Midoriya at his apartment." Himiko smiles and hums fondly. "Yes, that was a nice evening. It's too bad you couldn't join us. I'm sure the three of us would have had such fun." Ochako does not flinch at the insinuation. She only presses forward. "Commissioner Tsukauchi of the Shizuoka Prefectural Police has given permission for a small film crew and a representative from the Hero Commission to record an interview with you where you will describe the circumstances of your infiltration." Himiko flops down onto the ground, legs splayed out as she leans back on her palms. Her feet flop back and forth and Ochako is reminded of a child at circle time. "It wasn't an infiltration. I was just checking on a precious friend." Ochako grabs her coat and folds it over her forearms. "Will you do it, Toga?" You said you had something to offer me, Ochako, don't think I forgot. Ochako swallows and takes a deep breath, remembering why she is here. Remembering who she is doing this for. Blood, she says. I'll give you some of my blood. The strange trio of heroes linger in Izuku's apartment for several hours. Eventually, though, they take their leave just before noon with Katsuki swearing up and down he'll blow the hero commission apart while simultaneously telling Izuku he needs to pull on his big boy panties and stop being such a fucking worthless nerd. Izuku can't help but smile at the cursing. It's comforting, in its own way. He thinks about making breakfast, no, lunch, maybe, once they're gone. But he finds he is too emotionally drained to even consider what ingredients he has in the kitchen. Tea might be a better option, and easier, but he's too lazy to boil the water. He even considers opening one of the old, stale beers in the bottom of his refrigerator that someone gave him when he moved in. He can't remember who. Instead of doing any of those things, Izuku removes his prosthetic left arm and lets it fall to the floor as he sprawls across his couch. Above him, Izuku notices a brown huntsman spider leisurely making its way across the ceiling in search of its morning meal. He shivers despite himself. He's never been one for spiders, honestly, but he's not about to tempt fate by killing the thing. Besides, it's still too early and he's too tired to try and catch it to put it outside. So instead, he folds his good arm over his eyes to shield the arachnid from his vision and hopes he can fall back asleep. Even as his breathing evens out, some small part of him wishes he had asked his friends to stay. He is woken again by more knocking. And when his eyes shoot open, it is to the late afternoon sun as it sprawls across his living room. He checks his phone, beside him on the floor, only to find dozens of text messages. Izuku supposes he should be grateful that technology makes it so easy for Katsuki to communicate with others despite his inability to hear. Mostly, though, he is annoyed at having to fasten his arm back on in a rush to get to the door. He turns off the phone as another text dings its way through. Who would have thought Katsuki Bakugo would be so goddamn chatty? It would honestly be sort of amusing if it didn't feel so draining right now. Izuku knows Katsuki is trying to help. The man just has no idea what he's doing when it comes to caring for other people. And honestly, how could he? His history with Izuku is fraught with inequitable bullshit that they'd barely started to resolve when Izuku up and left. And then Kirishima, who had taken up the mantle of best friend in a way that even Katsuki had been unable to say no to, had died. Izuku imagined Katsuki felt very alone. Isolated in a soundless world as he attempts to figure out how he can still be a hero without his hearing. When Katsuki Bakugo tells you to fucking grow a pair, he could as easily be saying, deal with it you sack of shit, as, I'm here for you. Izuku just doesn't have the stamina to play emotional roulette right now as he stumbles over his couch to the door. He wonders if it's actually the blonde man himself, given the insistence of it. He's sure his neighbors are drafting a petition to have him evicted even as he reaches for the doorknob. Katsuki, I swear if that's you. But his eyes blow wide when he opens the door because it is not Katsuki Bakugo who waits for him on his doorstep. It's not Shoto or his mother. It's not even his irate neighbor from down the hall waving a petition of eviction. It's someone so wholly unexpected that Izuku stands like a fish that's been thrown into the sky and asked to soar into the heavens, his mouth dumb and open and not doing anything. He probably should have seen this coming, but if he's being honest, Izuku would have been less surprised if he'd opened the door to find the ghost of All for One himself standing before him. Dealing with that, in fact, would likely have been much easier. And then he hears her voice for the first time in years and he feels like maybe he really could fly, even if he were a fish. Hi, Deku. Where stories live. Discover now.